about Elizabeth Olsen, who finds it embarrassing to film Marvel scenes. I mean,
I want to know.
I would find it embarrassing too. Think about being Ezra Miller strung up on a bunch of fish lines, having to pretend to run in midair.
This is where I actually have a lot of sympathy for the actors, because it's an art form. What they do when it's done well.
It's not even done well in Marvel.
But I'm saying when it is done well, it's an art form. The best example I can give you is go watch the bonus features of any of the Planet of the Apes movies, where they have to have these very serious ethical discussions with a CGI circus, Andy Serkis, and it's absolutely hilarious to watch them pull these deep, emotionally riveting moments out of something that looks patently ridiculous. It's bonkers. So it's actually a testament to their ability to do their job. And if you watch any of them, even if we're not talking CGI, take a Nolan Batman movie, right? And picture any of those discussions, those deep discussions that had not just him and Joker, but Batman and Alfred, Batman and or him and Jim Gordon. And then you have to remember that he's wearing a giant rubber suit in a room filled with people with lights that are like 1,000 degrees, with a bunch of sets that look real but are actually foam or plastic.
They look real to us.
They look real to us, but they're not. Yeah. The art form of what they do it's why I always push back when people say that acting is easy. It is not. It is an extremely difficult thing to get lost in. Anybody who's actually made like a fan film or a film with your friends understands. You think that you'll be able to deliver that dialogue really well, the same dialogue you heard, because you've been given the roadmap to what it sounds like when that actor came up with that dialogue, with the way that they were going to say that dialogue in their head. Yeah. Okay, it's not easy to do. And then to do it while suspended on wires with gigantic green screens behind you. But it is embarrassing. I'm sure when she's doing her wavy Wanda hand motions.
Expert.
Yeah, I had to do the Scarlet Witch thing, and it felt
ridiculous.
Weird. Yeah. I can't imagine how it doesn't take them out of the scene so much. That, I mean, according to Christian Bale, he says that he doesn't even know what's going on.
Yeah, you don't.
When it's like that, when you're surrounded by green screens, you don't know what you're acting. So how can you act it correctly?
Yeah.
And remember when I think it was Jamie Lee Curtis. Am I imagining this? That Jamie Lee Curtis made some joke about how she'd never get casted in a Marvel film, but she's open to the idea.
Something like that. Yeah.
She joked about how it actually would end up just feeling like she goes to an empty warehouse 5 days a week.
That's all they do.
And it doesn't feel like you're part of an artistic project. It feels like you're just a stick figure.
Yeah. Christian Bale mentioned, he goes, go. They're like, go to Studio 7. He goes, what the hell is Studio 7? They're like, it's that one over there. Is it the one with the blue background, or is it the one with the green background? They're like, it's the one with the green background, but it's higher. You don't know, because they literally build the worlds from scratch. A good example, another great one is there's a really good breakdown video online of the video from in the movie Batman vs Superman with the fantastic Ben Affleck as Batman. Dane.
Dave is seething in the chat right now.
There's a great scene. One of the best scenes in the movie, however bad that movie may be, is the scene where, as the building's collapsing, Bruce Wayne makes the choice to run into the smoke as the building collapses, and it looks as real as can be. It's literally not there at all. They build the whole thing from scratch, and it's crazy. So to be able to do that, imagine he has to there's no smoke, there's no nothing. He has to put his arms up and look like he's interacting with this environment, and there's nothing there. It's not very easy. And like I said, and that's on top of the even funnier ones where they have to actually wear green screen suits, and you have to not laugh while you're doing that. Like
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Yes.
Yeah. That's the dragon.
I see the quote from Jamie Lee Curtis after Everything Everywhere All at Once was the center of this miraculous little movie that is making its way into the cinema consciousness of the world is kindness. It makes all of the other swirl and twirl of green screen offerings seem artificial. And that was at the same time as Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness.
And you would agree.
So she's obviously throwing shade at them, and I agree with it, on a fundamental level. Those things are artificial, not just in the special effects that they use to create these
but the
sets.
Story they tell.
But the story they're telling, and you can't disconnect those two things.
You know what the biggest loss of that is that the comics have great stories that you could be telling, but they can't bring themselves to do that because they don't know how to adapt them properly. So they know how to take the general elements, the core elements, and then manipulate them beyond all recognition until they're barely a shell of what they were when they were written in comic book form. Because admittedly, it's not the same medium. So you have to tell the story a little bit
what's
differently.
the alternative?
Yeah.
And also the character, like, I agree with you and I also disagree with you. I think that there's a time for things like that. Like Captain America Civil War, I think, is a great movie. I think it tells a different story than
what
actually
happened.
War? I'm sorry, The Winter Soldier.
Winter Soldier is still objectively the best Marvel movie.
Yes,
and I do absolutely mean objectively too. Yeah. I think it stands alone as a movie, not as a comic book.
It also tells, my personal opinion is that the people who wrote it, Marcus McFeely, are like under the radar, red pilled. Because that movie is so red-pilled.
2014, maybe. I mean, that's like, if that movie was made now,
same with Civil War. Civil War is about like not being on a government registration, not not being part of the world police, and like people who do that have agendas, and those agendas change. I was like, I don't disagree with that.
And one actually good thing about Civil War is that they don't actually give you an answer as to which one is right.
True.
They
make good points.
They do absolutely like that, and that's kind of like where not to get super far off topic, but that's a big thing when they talk about in comics have always been political. But the idea was that back then they gave perspectives from both sides and let the viewer, the reader, make up their mind as to what they thought was the right answer. They don't have that approach now. It's very ham-fisted now. Civil War did a very good job of presenting you both Tony and Captain America's perspectives with nuance so that you could pick whose side you found to be more inherently accurate to what their worldview was. Because they couldn't afford to lose both characters. You can't make one of those guys a villain long term because they're both essential to your storytelling. So maybe the best thing you can do in your storytelling is to treat all characters as if they actually matter. That way you can't throw an unnuanced perspective into your movie just because a character's disposable, right? But the point is, getting back to it, she says, it's silly. She goes, it's just silly. There's a lot of silly stuff. I always wish that one day they would just release a version of the film without any special effects, because then you would understand how ridiculous it feels, how spectacular the work is that goes into making these. And I am literally thinking, like, I wonder what she feels like when she's doing the wavy hand motions, and she's like,
ask her.
I mean, how are you supposed to pull emotion out of yourself
exactly
when you can't
visualize it?
I mean, in any way, you cannot sense what it's going to look like to the audience.
And there's even like a less technologically based approach to that. Even when you think about when you watch a movie, how much the music affects the mood of what you're watching without realizing that it does. That music isn't there when they're shooting that
it's
scene.
the same way that on a sitcom you have to make sure your joke lands without hearing the laugh track, and that's added afterwards.
Or the other example that I like to give is it's nightclub scenes. Imagine having to be in a fake nightclub with
where
a bunch
everyone's
of
silently shuffling
they're
around,
dancing, they're
drinking
dancing,
water.
And there's no actual music playing. You could hear a pin drop as a bunch of these people gyrate and pretend they're having a good time. That takes actual talent to be able to do that. Or just a total like need to make money. Like the extras like.
Even that is different because, like, if you have a conversation that's one-on-one while you're in a crowd of people, your brain does have the ability to zero in on one sound.
Yeah.
But, like, when you're just in a one-dimensional room of neon green or blue, and you're, like, hanging from wires or you're, like, wearing dots all over yourself or whatever effect that they're going to add afterwards, and you forget what the plot of the scene is, you forget what any of the dialogue even means, you're just doing something more robotic than emotional.
And that's what I mean when I say that the actors are actually like, imagine that you're part of a $250 million project and you're a lead actor on one of these movies, and it depends on, you know, who had the best deal was honestly was Robert Downey Jr. because most of his scenes were just him against, like, he got to actually look at a monitor and pretend like he was flying, but not actually have to do like fake flying. He was just basically, it was his head close up to a camera as he said a bunch of like one-liners and then they would animate the graphics in later. But the rest of them all have to do these, or even the fight scenes, which are very, very, you know, the contrived. You ever see the one, like the airport scene, the behind the scenes of the airport scene? It's incredible. Like they're in this enormous auditorium and they literally have to build an entire airport from scratch. It's
wow.
to actually sound like you're viscerally fighting with someone while trying not to laugh because you're in an enormous green room that looks like it's a Nickelodeon kids show from like the 90s.
Hey man, I will defend that because we just tried that.
Slime
and it
time.
is incredibly hard.
Yeah.
And the sun moves. It moves. So, like, I don't know if you watch Cast Castle, but when it starts, it's night, and then
we move. The sun doesn't move.
Well, no. Like, it moves through the sky, like to, you know what I mean.
We're getting
actually, technically,
that's not what happened.
It moves through the sky.
Yes.
But yes, you're right. Thank you for correcting me.
Do you think they ever get worried? Like, what if like they can't?
It makes continuity very difficult.
Yeah.
So.
Well, it's they have to do that with night shooting, with day shooting. Like that's why call times are so early because everything has to be perfect. If they're going to shoot that scene at 11 in the morning, they need to have that set ready and locked by 6 a.m. So that with good prep, the actual execution is the afterthought. So I have a lot of respect for the ability to pull good performances out of roles that are absolutely ridiculous. I want to start using patently all the time now.
Yeah.
Patently ridiculous.
I mean, that's cool and all if they can achieve that, but all of these bells and whistles I don't think are necessary to make a visually interesting film.
Yeah.
I think that the real world and practical effects are all a hell of a lot more interesting to look at than whatever I saw in Thor: Love and Thunder or in Multiverse of Madness.
So there is a discussion to be had here.
WandaVision.
There is a discussion to be had here because me and you have long held to the position that special effects detach the viewer from the emotional resonance that the movie could have. But that's obviously not 100% the case. I think it's more the material because if Everything Everywhere All at Once can pull emotional performances and emotionally resonate with people while giving you a very similar visual feast of a production, then it's a problem of the content.
I can't speak to that because I didn't see Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I've not, but I'm just saying that's the general idea here is that it pulled a strong emotional resonance. Yes. Michelle Yeoh is a fantastic actress, and told a better story involving a multiverse than a paint by numbers, corporatized, corporate structured film like Multiverse of Madness. Even with the helm of Sam Raimi, who's arguably a legendary director. Mm-hmm. So it's a problem with the storytelling, maybe not the storytelling method all the time, but maybe working with less forces the story to be better, right? When you have less to work with, you have to focus more on the elements you can control that cost less, which is good writing costs you less if you're writing the production than a whole slew of visual artists to hide the multitude of sins that may come through from your film.
And you need one or two good screenwriters, not a room of 10 plus that you have to pay.
That was one of the comments. I don't know if that was a super chat we got or if that was something I read earlier where they said, why does everything in Rings of Power seem like it was written by committee, right? Like the whole thing feels like every line was agonizingly written to make sure that nobody could possibly be offended by this dialogue.
And a committee, by the way, who seems not to have read the books.
Yeah.
Or seen the films even, which is even easier.
Or we're drawing from material they didn't have actual control of. That they didn't have any actual access to any of the source material that they wanted.
Why?
The Silmarillion, they didn't have access to it. They didn't have the rights to it.
Yeah.
So
then they also have to work within the bounds of it, canon wise, and then it ends up being like just a fruitless effort. Yep. Because this is not going to be remembered. I don't think that the new addition to the Karate Kid franchise is going to be remembered like Cobra Kai was remembered.
Cobra Kai will be remembered. Bring back Jaden Smith. That'll be great.
And like Christian Bale isn't an actor that I would have expected to see in a movie like Thor: Love and Thunder, and he did a good job, and he stood out because of that. That's something I don't think a DiCaprio would ever do.
No, he has a rule.
In a million years.
He has a rule. No drugs and no superhero movies.
Like, you can get it right only on accident, I think. And that's... He was a standout in the film, but the film, in my opinion, was abysmal. Like, I hated every second of watching Thor: Love and Thunder. I hated it. Yeah. It was like hell on earth. I'm not exaggerating. Like, it made me want to die.
I would agree.
It made me want to die.
I read his.
He played a good father.
Yeah.
I thought he was terrifying. Like they didn't lean into that enough. Like there just wasn't enough of whatever he was. It's almost like what happens with other shows that I'm familiar with.
Because it has to be kid friendly, but also suspenseful and thrilling,
kid-friendly.
And high stakes.
Thor: Love and Thunder kid friendly.
Well, they were. That's when we were reviewing it. I mentioned that they were like teetering between wanting to be family friendly or more adult. Yeah. So they were like confused with what language was appropriate, or if nudity was appropriate, or what kind of violence is appropriate to show. What themes can you include? And they didn't decide, and then it ended up just being a mishmash of like children's entertainment, but for adults.
So we're going from a world where you became an adult at 18 to a world where now you become weirdly not an adult at 13, but go through protracted adolescence till you're 45. There is no bounds anymore, and the world is completely on its head. None of it makes sense anymore. I do want to point out that Bale interview was fantastic. I read that whole thing, and I have a hard time. I hate interviews most of the time, like written interviews, but he's a unique personality. And it just makes me want to watch the clip of him yelling at everybody on Terminator Genesis.
Stay toxic, Kings.
Oh, good for you.
I love it.
To be fair, that was an MCG production, and I find him hilarious. I get a kick out of that guy. So I just want to point out that I do think that actors having to do that, it's not easy. It's just you take it for granted. Thanks for watching this clip, guys. If you want to see full episodes or follow us on social media, links are in the description below. Bye.